On this back to basics session again, follow up and recovery planning, and we will roll on through here. We've got a great presentation today. So joining me, you all are probably tired. I need to come up with a new picture because I've been on every one of these presentations. But my name is Allison Weibel. I'm happy to be here today driving this, and I am the manager of the client care program, workforce support. And I've got two great colleagues here to walk us through this casework and follow up session. So with that, Angie, I'm going to let you go ahead and introduce yourself.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Angie Johnson. I'm from the North Texas region, that's in Texas, and Swarm Division. And so I can consider myself a client care manager. I care for clients both as a shelter manager and as a casework manager. And so I will introduce the lead, JJ Moses. Would you introduce yourself?
I'd be happy to. Thanks, Angie. So as Angie said, my name is JJ Moses. I'm the Senior Associate for Casework and Recovery Planning, and that primarily supports the Casework and Recovery Planning Program. And I'm happy to be here with you. I'm formerly from Northern California Coastal Region in the Pacific Division, but here in the NHQ team now. Back to you, Allison.
Thanks, JJ. And happy to have you aboard here. All right, so a couple of quick housekeeping reminders. Again, I apologize for those that have been on other sessions. These first couple of slides will look familiar. This is a Microsoft webinar meeting. We've started to set these up as webinar meetings so that you all can register and put them on your calendar. I really hope that is working out well. I think it has been. It's a nice little reminder that you've signed up for this session. All of your lines are muted, listen only mode. All of the cameras are turned off. We are scheduled for 90 minutes, so probably planning on a discussion presentation for about 45 minutes to an hour, and then we'll open it up for questions and answers, and we'll take those at the end. When you are entering your question, please put in your name and your region so we know who we're interacting with. And one other thing, as always, as with the other sessions, we will, you saw me try and fumble to find the recording. We are recording this session, and the meeting and the slide presentation will be posted to the RC Care Toolkit on the office hours page soon after the event. Usually takes about a day or two, 1 to 3 business days to get that content up on the office hours page. So that will be coming. So let's take a quick look at our agenda. We've got our welcome that we've done. I'm going to go ahead and talk through some of the back to basics information, what we're doing here. You've all heard it before, and then we'll jump into the content around follow-up and recovery planning, and with some of our next steps, what's coming up, and then we'll open up for the question and answers. All right, back to basics series. Here we are again. What are we doing with this back to basics series? Well, we designed this series to review our fundamentals of the client care program. When we launched the client care program and RC Care over a year and a half ago, we were very focused on the system. We were focused on how to do what we do, how the system worked, how to do this, that, and the other. Our trainings and communications were all dedicated to system use. And unfortunately, that meant that we sacrificed the fundamentals of the client care program. It meant that the program pieces kind of took the back burner. So we are taking this time now, this opportunity to go back in time, back to our basics. We are running these sessions every 2 weeks. We've been going since June, so we've got quite a log of sessions, again, that can be found on the RC Care Toolkit page under the office hours session. Topics have been ranging from intake. We've talked about referrals. And here we are now talking about casework and recovery planning. We also still have plenty of sessions to come with some great topics, and we're going back to those foundations. You won't find click by click how to use RC Care in any of these sessions. We are talking programs principles of the client care program. We are planning on running this series through the end of the calendar year. We are not going to stop our office hours, but you know, there are things happening. We understand that there will be some fluctuation. And we've built this with some flexibility. We know disasters are not predictable, and there will be other priorities that will cause us to perhaps shift topics or insert different topics that are relevant at that moment. And we will socialize as we have been through the cross connection, through Yammer, through your recovery leads, and several other channels. We're really trying to get that out there. In addition, if you've been a part of any of our sessions, you're also getting some direct messaging. Thanking you for joining and sending you direct links to the session recordings and the presentations, and giving you the opportunity to register for our next session. So all of that is happening as well. So that is what these Back to Basics series are, what the intention is. So why are we doing them now? Well, there's, as always, a lot going on. We are implementing new things all the time, and we learn from those implementations, and we go back and we make changes, and we implement again. These include things that we maybe weren't working properly, or some nuances that are appearing, other elements that we need to account for, and these enhancements are happening every 3 weeks. If you hear us talk about releases, that is what we're talking about. These enhancements are coming out every 3 weeks, and we do notify of those as well. There is a great email update chain that we get emails weekly, and then the releases, when that happens, we get those emails. So given that time frame of every 3 weeks, we know that we are in a period where all of our doctrine that is posted absolutely does not match any of the functionality that or some of the program changes. So where there's a lag in information, we're taking the time now to go back and fill in those spaces with the most up-to-date information. We've learned a lot since launch, and all of you have contributed to what we've learned and what we've implemented. So just taking a moment to thank you, to say thanks for providing your feedback through lessons learned or the IT ticket, Simplify DCS, any of those channels. You've really helped change our program and our system. Just understand that all of that takes a while to update within our doctrine. Now, that being said, we are working on a very exciting project to get you more information in a more efficient manner, and in my opinion, a better location. We are working on a project related to the knowledge base articles. We are working to clean that up. We are working to take our system guidance, our click by clicks, and put them in the system where you're actually working. So you don't have to go back to the exchange if you have a question on how to do something. You can just go to the knowledge base articles within RC Care and perhaps find out how to reissue a CAC, or what the process is for updating client information. So some of that we are working towards that type of information being in RC Care. It's going to be, that knowledge base in RC Care is going to allow us to quickly indicate any changes that this within the system or a procedure. So we're trying to leverage that knowledge base area, especially as we work towards the simplified DCS, and DCS evaluates what our posture is and around training and doctrine. So we're really excited about that project. We're taking this again, another opportunity. We're resetting. We're resetting, as I mentioned before, putting to bed some of the myths and legends that may live from our old program and system, and perhaps even some from our early iterations of this program, of RC Care and the client care program. So that is what this is as well. All right. With that, I am done with my spiel and entrance, and I'm going to go ahead and throw this to JJ to take us through our follow-up and recovery planning session.
Awesome. Thank you, Allison. So during this presentation, we'll cover the various phases of recovery planning. And as Allison stated, we'll have minimal system and maximum introductory program time. So although you'll see a slide that shows the RC Care system, just one of those slides, that's not our focus for this session. So rather than show you how to do follow-up and recovery planning in the system, this particular session will be focused on program. Next slide. So here you'll see 3 introductory program documents. Our client care program standards and procedures provides an overview of topics like program eligibility, data security and privacy, consent to share, additional services in the client care program, as well as compliance and monitoring. The recovery planning standards and procedures focuses primarily on follow-up and recovery planning. And if you're familiar with that document, you'll see some of those themes in this presentation. And the third document you see here is the Client Care Program Price Guide. This details the financial assistance and qualifications for the Client Care Program. All of these documents are important to have a high-level understanding of the casework and recovery program. There are several other job tools and helpful documents on the exchange, and you can review those on the RC Care Toolkit. All of the documents on this page are being consolidated and updated, and over time you'll see several of these items located in the RC Care system, as Allison mentioned previously. Next slide. On this slide here, you'll see the typical client journey from intake to a client's recovery. Cases always start with some version of intake, whether that is on the scene of an event with our disaster action teams at a physical location on a DRO, disaster relief operation, or through our accelerated assistance program on larger disaster relief operations. From there, caseworkers will follow up with the client and begin recovery planning with the client. It is during this process where we can connect clients to additional resources and, if the client qualifies, provide additional financial assistance. These types of assistance ultimately help the client recover from their disaster. We'll talk more about the timelines later in this presentation. Next slide, please. Thank you. And then on this slide here, you'll see the 4 phases of our recovery planning program. And we'll go more into detail in the following slides, but just a general overview here. Phase 1 is where we prepare to contact the client and where we actually contact them. So this would involve reviewing the case and setting an appropriate tone with the client. Phase 2 would actually have that follow-up with our client. We would contact them and build rapport, build a relationship with them, and update any relevant case information and details. And then during phase 3, we would provide recovery planning services. This would consist of gathering roadblocks from the client, problem solving, providing referrals, and then issuing financial assistance if appropriate. And then finally, we have the 4th phase where we close the recovery planning service after we've completed our recovery planning and we've reviewed appropriate documentation. So to go more into detail on phase 1, I'll hand it off to Angie.
Thank you, JJ. This section, it will be a reminder, a refresher on what to do to prepare to contact the client. And so there's 2 pieces that we're going to talk about. One is going to be reviewing your case. And the second would be looking at some techniques to set the tone. We want you to do that before they make that initial phone call. So let's look at that, reviewing the case. So I've highlighted here some of the things that I want you to look at, that is important for you to look at. One at the very top is the case. So up there, you will see a case number, address, phone, and damage assessment. That tells you a lot of information about the case. The next thing that you're going to look at is that service line. We're going to focus on the recovery planning service line. In there, the first thing I look at is the service owner. So here in North Texas, that's kind of a best practice to put in the service owner who is working this case, because sometimes we have multiple people. Also, we're going to look at that status and substatus. We want to know that it's in follow-up. And then we're going to look at the total number of disbursements. That's information that will tell you to look even further. So still on that far left side, the first column there, you're going to look at that primary client information. So it's a lot of information there, but one thing in particular you're going to look at is their primary contact type. Some individuals will want you to call them. Some want text, some want email, and we can handle all of those. We want to try to make sure we're meeting the needs of our client. And then the next thing I would like is looking at that household members. It is important to know how many people that are in the household and their client condition. And you really want to know about the client condition of the primary, because that's going to play a big part in when you get to contact that client. Then we're going to go to that middle column. We're going to look at the feed. That's where there are a lot of messaging. If IDC has already messaged with the client, you'll be able to see all that in the call log, and you'll be able to see if your supervisor has set a task for you. You'll be able to see if there's any email traffic, and most important, if there are any case notes. All of that's going to be in feed. Then you're going to move over to details. And there's a lot of information in details. I like to look at all of it, but in particular, look at eligibility. I want to know that the address, the ID, the event, and the damage, all of that has been confirmed. So you're looking for that check mark that says a damage confirmation or event confirmation. And then I'm gonna look down a little lower to see, was a consent to share completed? If it was not, that might be something I need to do later. Then I'm gonna move over to that third little box that says SMS. That's that text box. There may be many text messages. So it's important to read all of the messages that have gone back and forth before you get ready to contact that client. Then I want you to move over to that payment section. In that payment section, the one thing you're going to look at is if the client got their immediate assistance. And so the way you go look for it, you go look there and see if it says created. That means the DAT team or the caseworker created the funding source, but it hasn't been received. If it said delivery complete, that means it's ready for pickup, but the client hadn't picked it up. You need to know all that before you talk to the client. If it says receipt confirmed, you know that the client has picked it up. If it says return, the funds were returned back to the Red Cross. So you got to start over. And then if it says voided, that meant the commitment was voided. So all of this was discussed earlier in a back to basic session on payments. So if you go to RC Care Toolkit and look at the office hours, you'll be able to see and the recording of the payment back to back session. So let's look now at the techniques that I want you to look at before you start calling or texting. So the first one I want to talk about is active listening. Active listening means involved listening. You are focused exclusively on the client. So I want you to get your mind set on that before you make that phone call or send that email. Because if you're on the phone call and the client says, where do I start? You can hear the anxiousness in the voice and you affirm that with a response. It's hard to know where we are to begin. Well, that's reflective listening. So I want the caseworkers to look at all these tools: careful listening, reflective listening, open-ended questions, affirmations, and summarizations as a way. This is your toolbox. These are things you're going to use in that first interface with that client. And that active listening is an integral part of understanding the client's story. Listening carefully until the client completes a thought. We're not going to interrupt. And sometimes reflective listening can be the one thing that when you say it, the client said, no, I didn't mean that. And they're able to come back and correct it. So reflective statements like, so you're frustrated that nothing has been working out. It sounds like you're disappointed with the situation. This gives the client an opportunity to correct anything you have said, even if it's just an impression. Now, one thing that we use a lot is open-ended and closed-ended questions. Both have value. Open-ended questions help you determine the client's needs. How are you feeling? Do you have a plan to begin your recovery? That's open-ended. Closed-ended questions have value also. That's the way we gather basic information. What is your address? How old is your son? Now, affirming what the client is saying is important also. When you can summarize what the client said. Here's what I've heard. That's a summarization statement. If I were in your shoes, I don't know if I could have managed nearly so well. That's an affirming statement. So all of these techniques, and I'm going to tell you a few more. If we go on to setting the tone, that's a tool that you're going to use, setting the tone. So I want you to look at the good tones and the cautionary tones on the next slide. Okay, so there is nothing wrong with any of these tones. I want you to familiarize yourself with these common tones. When you're speaking with a coworker, a partner, or a client, you have to be aware of the tone. So if it's someone you know very well, some of these cautionary tones may be very effective, but sometimes they're not. How about, good morning, how's your day? You have a wonderful smile. What kind of tone was that? That's kind of encouraging, kind, and welcoming. If I said, good morning, everyone, need to talk to you. That's pretty direct tone. That may not be one that a client who's just lost everything would like to hear. A good tone is, I can't imagine what you have been through during this past week. That's empathetic and understanding. Can I get you a bottle of water? That's kind and welcoming. Name, address, phone number. That's direct and hurried. Do you want to be friends with me on Facebook? That's a little bit too friendly. We don't want to get into those cautionary areas unless we know that's appropriate with the person that we're talking to. Now, here's a few more things that you can use depending on the situation. And these I call the 3 C's on the next slide. Showing concern, providing comfort, and being calm. You're going to be confronted if you're in remember, not all of these occasions are over the phone. Some of these you're on a DRO and you're sitting with the client. And if a client is distraught, you need to show concern. You need to make sure you actively listening to what the person said, letting them tell their story. At the same time, being empathetic and compassionate. And letting them know that whatever they're saying to you, you're going to keep it in confidence. And sometimes it may be family members. One family member is distraught because of another family member. Remain neutral. Do not take sides. Remember, that's one of our fundamental principles. So in some situations, you're just going to be comforting. So when you get to these situations, understand there's some cultures that cry. It's just the way they are. It's okay. So understand that and provide the necessary comfort. And in all situations, we want you to be calm. We don't want you bawling because the client is bawling. We want you to be focused, avoid disruptions, be patient, be aware of what's going on, but keep calm. This is what I call the 3 C's. Now, I think I will return control to JJ to talk a little bit about the follow-up phase.
Thank you, Angie. Now that we've gone through phase 1, preparing to contact the client, we'll discuss the second phase, which is following up with the client. During this process, we will contact the client and we'll build rapport with them, and then we will update the case with necessary demographic information. So on the next slide here, we'll see this image that's really just a summary of the case's journey. Previously, you saw the client's journey. This has various timelines through the case's life cycle. What we want to focus on here is that within 24 to 72 hours, the first follow-up attempt should be made, with some variations on the timeline based off of the size and scale of each disaster that we'll go over next slide. But within 30 days, all financial assistance should be provided. And then within 45 days, the recovery planning service, along with other services, should be closed. Generally, at that time, the case will also close. So on the next slide here, so as we described previously on the previous slide, follow-up should occur within a specific time frame that's dependent on the size of the disaster. So for levels 1 through 3, follow-up should occur within 24 to 72 hours of case creation, and all clients are automatically enrolled into our recovery planning service. For level 4 and above disasters, follow-up should occur within a week of case creation, and rather than automatically being enrolled into recovery planning, clients in larger disasters have the option of opting into recovery planning. For all events, caseworkers will attempt to make contact with the client 3 times using multiple methods, and if successful, they'll move on to the second or the next phase of phase 2, next part of phase 2, which is building rapport. If the client does not want to pursue recovery planning, we can document this in the case and close the recovery planning service. If the caseworker is unsuccessful after the first or second attempt, we can document this attempt in the case and schedule a reminder for the next attempt. And if the third attempt is unsuccessful, we can close the recovery planning service. Now to go more into building rapport and building trust, I'll hand it back to Angie.
Now, building trust is not something you can do in one day. It takes time to build trust. So these are some helpful guides to developing a relationship where there's a trusted relationship. So we think of the first thing you do is to make a connection. Think of when you're on the job, or think of when you first meet somebody. The one thing you can do is see, what do you have in common? I love to find somebody else who's from Texas and talk about Texas and the Cowboys or the Rangers or other things like that. That's in common. Another thing that we can do is to appreciate the differences that we have between us and address those. So these are ways that you can get to know your client. Spend some time getting to know the client, open-ended questions and listening. So one piece of building trust is being honest and demonstrating accountability. That means if I say, let's meet at 7:30 every morning, I'm going to be there at 7:30. If I tell a client that I'm going to have some material ready for them, I'll have a list of resources available ready for them tomorrow. Building that trust means I'm going to do exactly what I said. And it's important, clients talk to each other. If one client is shared one information and your client does not have that information, that hurts the trust relationship. So another thing I want you to do is show empathy. So we already talked a lot about active listening, but your body tells the person how you really feel. I think the statistic used to be when you're communicating with a person, 80% is the body language, and only about 20% are the words that come out of your mouth. So if you are not really feeling empathy for this person's situation, it will come across. So always think about, I like the piece that says walk a mile in their shoes. Think about where this person has come from, what the opportunities they have had. And if you could have made it as far as they have with that kind of background. So be empathetic, not sympathetic, empathetic. And then your conversation. This is important. Be at the same conversation or communication level, using the same kinds of words at the same level as your client. Open-ended questions. And here's where the tone of your voice comes in. Remember, these clients are going to be frustrated. We don't have to be frustrated because they are frustrated. I was in a class, psychological first aid class that I took, and I was communicating with the teacher how frustrated I was with clients who call and they're talking over me, sometimes using a little bit foul language and all of that. And she told me, smile. And I said, what in the world would they did? But I tried it. I actually tried it. And it made a difference in the way I came across to her or him, and it calmed the person down. So tone of voice that we use in our conversations, what words we use in our conversation, and whatever you do, always show respect. Never step away from being respectful. So the next thing we're going to talk about is updating the case. So we talked about building rapport. Now we're going to talk about just two pieces, but two very, very important pieces. We need to look at that case, as we talked about earlier, and verify that information. So we need to make sure that that email, even in my area, we're constantly updating emails and phone numbers and addresses. We cannot serve the client if the contact information is incorrect. And the referral, if you want to give them referrals, if they don't have a good email, and you try to send them referrals over email, and it's a bad email, you can't do it. We want to send, just think about the authentication process. If we don't have a good email, that bogs down that authentication process. We need to have a good email. And I say, if they have email, make sure it's a good email. And phone, we need to have at least one or both of those. The next thing is demographic information. Even in my area, there are so many caseworkers that are reluctant to gather demographic information. They don't even try, they just skip right over it. I want to tell you why it's important to get that information. We need to be able to convince donors, community leaders, and other stakeholders that we equitably meet the needs of impacted individuals, all of them. And we're not underserving any individual group due to our unconscious bias or access barriers. That's important. Some of our donors and community partners have missions and priorities that focus on these specific underserved populations. And they want to make sure that any funding that they give us is going to be used with that specific mission or priorities in mind. Some of our grants include requirements to report on demographics. And so when they have a grant audit process, we got to show that statistics. And the American Red Cross is increasing its focus on identifying the most vulnerable populations. You've heard of the new mission adaptation, where we're looking at hunger, housing, and health. And there have been a few instances in the past when particular communities have come and raised concerns about whether we're really servicing equitably all of the population. So we need to have these kind of statistics to demonstrate that we're doing it properly. And here's another thing that I didn't realize until recently. Our funders make up 65% of the donations. So if you don't have this demographic information, and we're not able to prove, that's 65% of the Red Cross budget that could be lost. So they like income level, race, gender, etc. We serve because their goals are related to these demographics. So remember, our funding is largely dependent on whether donors feel that we are helping the populations that they're focused on. So the demographics that we have listed are those demographics that's important to them. Now that we have addressed reviewing the case and setting the tone, let's go to the next slide. I want to address some of the follow-up. We've addressed follow-up, making the initial contact, building trust, and updating the case. I want to talk about that important piece, which is the recovery planning service, which has an ultimate goal of helping the client prepare a recovery plan. And that's for everybody, whether it's a level 2, a level 3, everybody needs a recovery plan. They're transitioning from that hotel to something. So let's start with identifying and overcoming roadblocks. So it is every caseworker's responsibility to help the client identify and overcome roadblocks. So you might ask yourself, well, what is a roadblock? For me, it's anything that's keeping a client from recovering. Anything. But for us, a roadblock could be a job tools. It could be a car or a truck. It could be childcare. I have no place to put my kids, or they're not near their school. Or it could be physical, mental, or social well-being. Whatever it is, we have tools and partners to help our clients. Once you've identified the roadblock, it's time to assist the client in their recovery planning. So we can help overcome those roadblocks with some tools. We have lots of tools: problem solving and advocacy. And we're going to talk about how to problem solve and how to advocate for our clients. We can issue referrals, and we can provide financial assistance, those supplemental assistance and RDO exception funding, if applicable. So let's address each of these. Let me start with the problem solving. That's on the next slide, problem solving. Okay, so where are you going to start? Your client has a problem. What are you going to do? You're going to review the problem, and you're going to break it down into pieces. And let's start with the smallest piece and say, what the client says, I don't have a job. So you're going to break it down to the smallest piece. You're going to start with, well, what kind of skills do you have? Then you're going to say, okay, with those skills, let's start tomorrow, and we're going to have a list of all the kinds of places that use those kind of skills. That's what you can do tomorrow. And the next day, we're going to help you with your resume. The next day, you're going to go out and start delivering that resume. So we're going to consider also, no matter what the problem is, we're going to consider what resources we have available to us. So there can be some local resources. Remember the referral system. There's local and other resources that we have. And we're going to ask the person, well, what resources do they already have? Like, what skills and abilities do you already have? And do you have a faith-based organization that can help you? So sometimes faith-based organizations will have a list of places that you can rent. We'll have a list of jobs. So we're going to look at family and friends and community. What do they have to offer? What can they bring to the table to help with this problem? And then we're going to seek other agencies. So our local government, what does the local government have that we can bring to the table? So we're going to look at the big companies. So what big companies that can we have a job fair maybe for this person? And one thing I want everybody to do when you're solving a problem is to make sure that client knows that their recovery plan is unique. It's not going to be like the next person in the cop to them. So it's going to be unique based on your needs. And we're going to declare the early wins. So if that person comes up with, we're able to create a great resume for this person, let's give a high five and celebrate that win. And then when you get stuck, you don't know where to go next, you always have a supervisor. Go to that supervisor. Now, I don't want to shortchange coworkers. You have a lot of experienced coworkers. Remember, we have to keep in mind confidentiality. But if that coworker can help you resolve this problem, use the coworker. But always your supervisor is there. Now I want to talk about advocacy a little bit, because that's important too. There have been many occasions when someone said, my insurance, this is one example I want to use. I've been calling my insurance, but they're not calling me back. Remember, Red Cross is a powerful name. We've done good work. The insurance companies, we work very well with them. Sometimes a call from a Red Cross phone and say, this is Red Cross calling, you may be able to get through when that individual was not. That's advocating. Another way to advocate is, I've had clients who said, I was rejected from FEMA. So not violating their privacy, but I could talk with the FEMA liaison and talk in general and find out what that client needs to do is to reapply and put some additional information in. That's advocacy. So those are two things that you can always do. You can help. And remember, I'm always going to say help. We want the client to take the lead, but you're going to help the client with the skills and knowledge you know, and you're going to be an advocate for them. So let's talk a few minutes about referrals. So referrals are really important. The caseworker is the one that connects the client with both internal, Red Cross, and external services. When a client presents a need that's health, mental health, or spiritual care, they direct that or create a referral to disaster health service or disaster mental health or disaster spiritual care. Those individuals will take care of their needs. And one thing I always say, if it's not on a DRO, you might have to make a phone call. If you're in our area, sometimes we have to make a phone call to the nurse on call or send an email to our mental health provider and say, I have a client we just met today that needs help. That way they can be more attentive and quicker. When it comes to external referrals, I want you to consider local government. I want you community partners, which includes your VOADs, and then state and national partners. All of those are there to help you. And so we have this wonderful system in place now, the Red Cross Resource Directory, redcross.redcross.org. So that directory has been updated from Find Help, or from, used to be Aunt Bertha, went from Aunt Bertha to Find Help, and now it's the Resource Directory. And so the Red Cross, the RC Care has an embedded link to the social network that connects people and programs. But it's only as good as the work that the region has done. If you have not gone out into your community and looked for food resources, clothing, rental resources, all the resources you can find that clients might need, then you're going to have a dearth of information in the database when it comes to helping your clients. We have to do some work in blue sky to make that database good. One thing I'm really proud of, so they told you about these knowledge articles, knowledge-based articles. Well, referrals, first, they've already had their back to basics. And so their back to basics, you can go and review the programmatics on that. It's already recorded. But in addition to that, they already have it. Oh, they have a lot of them, but 7 knowledge articles that pertain to referrals. So if you want to look at issuing internal referrals, it's there. Documented roadblocks, all you have to do is go look at the knowledge base. Resource directory, it's there. External referrals and sharing referrals with clients, all of those knowledge articles are there for you. And so there is a wealth of information on providing referrals. And I noticed many of the questions that we got from you all was on referrals. So I would like to direct you to the RC Care Toolkit, office hours, the basic, back to basics on referrals. And so with that, I'm only going to briefly talk about the next slide, which is supplemental and RDO exception. There's a reason for that. And that's because this topic is going to be talked about on September the 8th in the next Back to Basics. And so the 2 things I will say is there is eligibility requirements for offering supplemental assistance on levels 1, 2, and 3. And we must abide by those, and they're going to talk about those. And supplemental financial assistance is intended for those with the greatest needs and whose recovery roadblocks impact their ability to recover. So I look forward to the next Back to Basics to talk to you in details about these 2 subjects, RDO exception and financial assistance. Back to you, JJ.
Thanks, Angie. Now, now we've reached the 4th and final phase of recovery planning. During this process, we'll complete recovery planning, we'll document any relevant updates, and then we'll finally close the actual service itself. So on the next slide here, in this section, the caseworker will determine if the recovery planning service should be closed. To do this, it's recommended to first check the case notes to understand where the client is in their recovery. Ideally, the caseworker during their building rapport phase would follow that recovery plan and be able to understand that. After reviewing case notes, call the client to confirm if all emergency unmet needs have been met. If the client responds with a no, we can use the skills developed in this overview to identify where the client may need additional assistance. This may include offering additional referrals or financial assistance to meet that additional need. If the client responds with a yes, the recovery planning service can be closed as all emergency needs have been met. And the recovery planning service does not need to be closed immediately after supplemental assistance or an RDO exception has been processed. Again, that will be a little bit more detailed in the next session. But the case will automatically close when all services have been closed. As such, when the recovery planning service is closed, the case may remain open if the client has additional needs such as DMH or DHS. But when all services have been closed, the case will automatically close. And then to touch on the timelines again, the recovery planning service should be closed within 30 days, or services should be closed within 30 days. And all of the cases should be closed within 45 days of case creation. After the case is closed, the client will receive a text or an email with a survey with a summary of case information, as well as a link for the client satisfaction survey. And then to follow up and to close us off, I'll hand it to Allison.
Thanks, JJ. Great presentation. Really appreciate both you and Angie running through all of that information. All right, folks. So yes, we've hit the end. Very quickly, just want to bring up some of the what's upcoming, some of the next things that are coming up. We've already mentioned the next session, which will be Thursday, September 8th, same time. We have our supplemental assistance and RDO exceptions back to basic planned. We also are considering a session around support roles. So if you think of like your regional account authorizers or your regional event administrator, your case administrator, some of those support roles, we'll be having a session around that coming up. And you've heard it multiple times, Angie, I appreciated all of those plugs to our office hours page on our RC Care Toolkit, where we do have all of our previous sessions, all of the recordings and slide presentations. This slide deck and presentation will be up within the coming days. Just have to get that manipulated and for the system, and we'll have that up. And again, you will also probably receive some type of an exit survey with some additional opportunities to ask questions, and then just a registration for the next session. Just keep it on going. So that is what's coming up next. We have hit officially the end of the presentation. So at this point, we will go ahead and, I mean, it's been open for questions the entire time. So if you do have questions, we are asking that you use the Q&A tab at the top of your Teams page. There's an image right there of what it looks like. So please go ahead and enter your questions in that tab. Again, remember to put your name and region so we know who we are interacting with. But if you don't see or we have had some instances where folks can't see the Q&A. We've also set up a Menti website. So you would go to menti.com, MENTI.com, and you would enter the code of 20422514. It is showing on the screen. There is also, we're getting fancy here, folks. We've got a QR code. So you can take your phone and just scan that QR code, and the Menti site will come up. You'll enter in all of this information. So we've got those two opportunities, the QA option or the Menti. So we are going to do that. And I know we have a moderator in Dan Lavalette for our Q&A session.
And there's my cue. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm taking a look on Menti. I don't see anything submitted yet. We don't have any questions from the audience. They did check the codes, made sure those were correct, so everything's good there. And I'm not seeing any questions in the Q&A yet, so stand by here. And folks, let me just add, if the presentation was that helpful, if there are truly no questions, feel free to just drop. I mean, I don't want to get a flood of like no questions comments or something like that, but if somebody wouldn't mind just dropping a just a quick note in there just to make sure that all our systems are operational. We did see a question come through the Q&A when we first started, several actually, so they were just administrative. They weren't related to the content of the thing, so we just followed up with folks individually, but I am still not seeing any. Oh, here we go. Okay, so I am getting great presentation. All right, looks like we have a question here about the resource directory. So I guess maybe I don't think Flo's on with us to answer questions. I know she's in the presentation today, but I don't think she has microphone right. Otherwise, I'd send it to her. But JJ or Angie, maybe you're able to answer this. Where is the link for the resource directory in RC Care?
I'm happy to take a stab at that, and then Angie, if you want to add to that, feel free. So for the resource directory, we would typically recommend people go to resources.redcross.org and access the resource directory there. Angie, do you have anything to add to that?
I wasn't sure if they're talking about when you're in RC Care, you go to referrals. And it's an automatic link from referrals.
Awesome. Well, thank you both for answering that. Dory is the person who asked the question. So Dory, if you do have additional questions about accessing the resource directory, feel free to go to our office hours page in the RC Care Toolkit. That's where we post the recordings of these sessions. As Angie mentioned earlier, I think it was Angie, we did a session, Flo Henkin took us through referrals not too long ago. So that information's in there if we didn't answer your question, but thank you.
And so there is an overview in the knowledge base. So if the person just goes to 1174 in the knowledge base, they will see a number of referrals. I mean, recovery, how to do recovery. And that will probably tell you, and there's a search the resource directory. So the knowledge base has a lot of the how-tos already. And maybe we can make that available.
Yeah, I think that's great. Thank you, Angie. All right, we got a question. Angie, this one's for you. This one comes from Gail. I don't know which region Gail's from, but she asked, shelter registration is not considered intake, or can it be? And who makes that decision? I don't know if you're able to talk to that. I know today we're just talking about casework and recovery planning, but if you can answer that.
Yes, I can. Shelter registration is different than intake. So in the new process, there's about maybe 5 or 6 questions, maybe 8 questions in the new shelter. I think it's called client information form, but there's a registration piece there. The intake, the actual intake in RC Care occurs later. So those are 2 separate things, but we do not duplicate questions. The questions that are asked on the registration form, we can take those answers and put them in RC Care. We don't have to duplicate.
Awesome. Thank you, Angie. All right, I'm going to read our first question off from Menti, just pivot away from the Q&A. Kathleen from Georgia asked, can sandbox access be enabled for trainee caseworkers before they complete all 11 classes? So I'm happy to take this one. Yes, it can. We can give sandbox access to anybody who is part of disaster cycle services, has an interest in the client care program or an interest in learning more about RC Care. There's no longer any training requirement to get access to the training sandbox. Understand that in training, lots of times we point folks back to the sandbox to begin with. So it would be really circular if we made people complete the training that they need access to the, it doesn't make sense. So anybody that's interested in RC Care or client care program, what you can do is just submit an IT ticket for access. We've actually changed it so unlike the production environment, folks don't need to be approved by their regional account authorizer. So if you have somebody that's interested or new folks can go ahead and just submit those tickets and they'll get approved. So thanks for that question, Kathleen. Bear with me, we've got a few folks. Thank you for sending in. We got a couple awesome jobs, got a couple no questions. That's fantastic. Testament to our great folks on leading this discussion today. Let me see this one here. Another job well done. Let's see. Lynn asked, can we get a copy of the slide deck from Missouri, Arkansas? Yes, Lynn, we're going to be posting this to our office hours page. You'll see there, if you go through the RC Care Toolkit, there's an office hours tab up on the top left. If you click in there, you'll see all copies of all the slide decks from all the Back to Basics sessions we've done, as well as the recording links. Hey, folks, I did publish the link to resources, or secure resources for the resource database. So that is published in the queue if folks want to see that. I know a few folks have asked for the link. Lots of referrals questions here. Angie, maybe you could help us with this one. Sandy asked, with the new way of doing referrals in the case, how do we put in local referrals that are not in the directory? And if you can't answer that, that's all good, as we did have that referral session. So if we're not able to answer that, if it's not in the knowledge base, I'd ask you, Sandy, to just send us a note at RCCare rollout and we can follow up with the answer to that. But Angie, can you speak to that by chance?
Okay, I'm sorry. I had to step away for a phone call. So what was the question?
All good. The question is, with the new way of doing referrals in the case, how do we put in local referrals that are not in the directory?
Okay, we do put them in the directory. So it is, you can put them in the directory. And I was saying those knowledge base and in the summary that that Flo gave in the back to basics, she gives you step by step how to put them in the directory, how to put new resources in the directory.
Awesome. Thank you, Angie.
But I don't know, we don't have chat that I can put some of that information in the chat, do we?
We do not, but you could post in the Q&A. You could actually
Okay, so
ask
I have
a
a
question.
document. I have a document that I can send you, Dan, that summarizes all of the knowledge base for referrals.
Okay. Yeah, I don't think I'll be able to share the link, but maybe we can share that with the group after the session. I know we send out the recording link and an invite to the next session to everybody who attended the previous one. So maybe we can tag that on, Angie. Bear with me, folks. A lot of referrals questions. Okay, here's a good one. Karen asked, what if the client has more problems than can be completed in 1 month? Angie or JJ, I don't know if you could talk to that. If recovery planning is going to take longer than 30 days.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in there, and then Angie, if you want to add to that, if you want. The timeline that we presented earlier is more of a generalization of how long cases should be opened and when things should happen. There are always outliers where people have higher needs and it might take a little bit longer to resolve those needs. So if we need to have things open a little bit longer than 30 days or 45 days, then that's acceptable. You know, we always want to work with the client to help them resolve their roadblocks before we close the case.
And I always say, just check with your RDO and have a good case for why you need to extend it longer. And the RDO can approve certain things.
Awesome. Thank you both. Got a question here on Menti around housing. Lack of housing is an issue when working with a client. Is there a better resource within Red Cross that caseworkers can work with to find housing resources?
I will take that. So headquarters is doing a whole lot right now because of that mission adaptation. Housing is a problem. They're only working in 8 areas right now, but I would say each region should start now. And so I know in Dallas, we have a committee that does nothing but work on housing. And so we need to start now looking at rental, I guess it's the rental associations that are local. Look at, we call them second chances. These are special housing for people who have been incarcerated. Start looking at all of those things now in your region, because you will have more information than national headquarters will have, even though national headquarters is working with national organizations, state organizations, because they know housing is a problem, but they can work in every region. They've only picked 7 of the hardest hit regions. Kentucky is one of them. And so they're going to put resources into those areas to try to identify those things. But it's probably wise if our community partners would start working on just housing, finding resources that'll make that available to the caseworkers when they need them.
Fantastic. Thank you, Angie. Let's see. All right, question here around roadblocks. What should we do when the roadblock hasn't been met, but there are no more resources available? In particular, it's another housing question. In particular, housing is very tight right now, almost impossible to find in a few days.
So I don't ever think about finding housing in a few days. So 30 days is, 10 or 15 days is not unreasonable for a person to find a rental property or a rental house or something like that. But what I always say, if there are no partners that are going to help with hotels or whatever, when they can't find housing, then what we are to do is that's when you give supplemental. That's when you ask for RDO exceptions to help out. But the bottom line is we cannot do everything. Our job is emergency needs. Emergency needs are not 30 days out. So we will have already taken care of their emergency needs. And we have to look to the community to help with those others.
Thank you, Angie. Jamie, I'm going to kick one over to you real quick. This one's a little bit off topic, but it's related because it ties into casework and notes from intake. Shirley asked, as a caseworker, I find it difficult to pick up a case and have no background from the DAT member who opened the case. I understand there's now a space on intake for additional information. Is that true? And I guess not just Jamie, if Angie or JJ could take that too.
Yes, it is true. There is a field that at the end of the intake form, it is called situation awareness, and that is where a intake worker can leave a case comment, a brief case comment about what happened. It's a small field. It can hold as much as a standard case comment, but it is small on intake. So I would still recommend anyone that needs to leave a longer, more detailed case comment for their caseworkers in a more, just in a situation that may require it, I would still recommend that they might want to log into the case themselves and actually leave that comment. Yes, it does exist on the end of intake, and any worker can also log into the case and leave a comment. We also just want to say, the system is what it is and works for us, but it also should never take the place of just actually interacting with your teammates. And if you have a case that as a caseworker you've opened, and the case note, the comment seems a little confusing, the family structure seems a little confusing, and you're not certain before you make the call, it's okay to call the DAT workers, to call the people who did intake and ask them for some insight onto, the family dynamic that might help you. And it's okay if I'm, a DAT worker, an intake worker who opened a case and it's a particularly difficult one, or it has just a lot of unique circumstances that I don't think can be fully captured in a case comment. I leave a comment, but there's something maybe confidential I want to share, or that I don't feel has been accurately captured. It's okay. Call the caseworkers, let them know. Just because we have this system doesn't mean that we don't have to talk to each other either. So.
Awesome. Thank you, Jamie. So we got a question here from Ann in Interior, Arkansas. And says, we have a lot of folks who just want to do intake and not continue on to recovery. In the past, a caseworker would follow the client all the way through the process and close the case when completed. Any suggestions on how to get intake workers to do follow-up? So, and the first thing that I would say is that's not the intent. That's not how we set this up. We created a permission for folks to just do intake, and that's the intent of that position, is just to do intake. That said, caseworkers can do intake, as can intake supervisors. So there are additional folks. I mean, if there was a situation where a caseworker was, say, on a DAT team as well, they would certainly be able to create the case, follow up, and do the recovery planning, and kind of see it from beginning to the end. But we still have a special permission set for the intake workers. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that IDC workers can also do intake. So that's another great resource as well. Make sure your IDC folks are trained up on the intake form. That's part of their required training as well. So thank you, Ann, for the question.
And one thing I would like to say is on many DRs, or even locally, I have a lot of IDC workers that will say, I don't do intake, but we know they're required to train in it and they should be doing it. So that's important to emphasize, that IDC workers should be able to do intake.
Thank you, Angie. Got a good reminder in here from Carolyn, not a question, but a statement for advocacy. Please remember disability integration. Really appreciate you sharing that. Thank you. I just published that comment. Leonard, I got one here that I'm going to kick over to you around FEMA and DROs, if you would be so kind as to take this one. Claudia asked, is FEMA only for a DR?
Is FEMA only for a DR? And so I'm going to take a stab here and just assume that the question is about, is FEMA really only for the large scale DRs where we use accelerated assistance? The question is, or the answer is yes. So we leverage the FEMA registration information, match it with our DA, and we send out an accelerated outreach for during large scale DROs. Obviously for our, day-to-day single multifamily fires, even for some of our smaller events, we don't get the presidential declaration, which doesn't activate FEMA. So we're not able to leverage that resource. We're only able to leverage them during the large scale DROs. So I think that answers the question, but I want to make sure I'm not missing anything else on the question.
No, I think that was it, Leonard. Thank you.
Perfect.
I think they were talking about IA. Appreciate that.
Yeah.
Okay, Jamie, another one for you, just because my poor brain is cramped at this point. I can't remember who can do what some days, especially on a Thursday. Kathleen asked, can a DAT, so there's no DAT caseworkers, there's just caseworkers and there's intake workers. So I'm a little thrown off by the first part of this, but I'm going to assume this is, can a caseworker issue supplemental? I thought there was a restriction that whoever did the immediate assistance couldn't issue the supplemental assistance.
So yeah, there's no restriction on that IA and supplemental need to be issued by different people. But an intake worker, someone who just has intake access, cannot issue supplemental. So I just want to call out that difference, just because I do see the question. It says DAT caseworker. So yeah, it's a caseworker, IDC worker, supervisor intake, supervisor doc review. All of those people can issue supplemental. And it can be the same person as the person who issued the immediate assistance. Obviously a doc reviewer, a supervised doc review can't do immediate assistance, but those were all the people who could issue supplemental. So they don't have to be different. There's no separation of duties issues with that. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you, Jamie. A couple of referrals questions. Give me 1 second, folks. Angie, you might be able to talk to this a little bit, or JJ. There's a question here from Diana. Please define emergency needs from Red Cross policy. We have a lot of clients with no jobs and no transportation before the disaster. For client emergency needs, our money, I'm assuming this is our client emergency needs money in fixing their vehicle.
Okay, so I'm not sure I got the first part, but it says, can we provide services to a person who does not have a job? Is that the question?
I think what they're asking is, is it appropriate to assist folks that had pre-disaster situations, like pre-disaster, no transportation pre-disaster, no job pre-disaster? Is it still appropriate? And I'm reading into this question a little bit. So Diana, if I'm missing it, I apologize, but does that make sense?
I believe we help anybody that's displaced by a disaster. So I have had homeless people whose tent was washed away by a flood. So that is a person who was displaced by a disaster. So I would be willing to help that person. So I wouldn't necessarily be willing to help a person who was just homeless and came to the shelter. They had no impact by a disaster. So that's a different situation, if I'm understanding the question properly.
Yeah. Hopefully thank you, Angie. So if whoever asked that question, Diana, if we missed it, please feel free to use the Q&A to send us another comment. Thank you, Angie. All right, we got one here from Sandy that just came in for quick accessibility. Is there a list that is accessible to us caseworkers that gives the knowledge number, so knowledge article number? It can take forever to find the correct knowledge article otherwise. So I can talk to this one. Sandy, we're working on adding categories. As we work to update all of our knowledge articles, we're categorizing them, and we're making sure that they're organized in a way that's ultimately going to help us build something called a help center or a knowledge base. I know we're calling our knowledge articles a knowledge base now, but if you can imagine basically any large online entity, from banks to Facebook to the grocery store to any e-commerce, any commerce place with a website that has a help section, typically their help articles are organized in the way that we're working to build out. So it's hard for me to give you a vision of what we're working on without kind of sharing like my screen or something like that. But you'll have to trust when we say that once we get these articles updated and create the ones that are missing, make sure everything's categorized, we're going to be republishing everything in a place that's very, very accessible and easy to search and easy to browse by topic, or it's easy for us to feature certain things that maybe were updated recently or frequently asked questions that we receive from the field. We'll be able to promote all that content so it's at your fingertips. The other thing that I would say is, in the meantime, what you can do is you can use the topics in the knowledge base or in the knowledge articles. If you go into RC Care, you go into the search bar, we have all of our articles are organized, and we'll add a list of topics in there so you can kind of understand the different categories. But follow-up and recovery planning is one, case administration is one, IDC is one. If you go in, it's probably easier to find the topics by searching for articles, because all the articles that are in the system now are linked to a topic, but you can map backwards from that. So if you open a article that talks about follow-up and recovery planning, you can click on that topic and you can browse all of the articles that are a part of follow-up and recovery planning. So that is probably the easiest way to do it right now while we work on building out something that's better for the future. And hopefully that helps to answer your question.
Dan, I think you should also give a plug for the demo that you did in our user support back to basics. The way that you showed how people can search for knowledge articles, I think, was helpful as well.
Yeah.
Because people, if they're not used to searching for articles, they might not find them. Whereas I search for them all the time. I find them very easily. And so I think what you did then in that back to basics was really helpful for people.
Yeah, that's a good reminder. Thank you, Jamie. So what Jamie's talking about is something in Salesforce called the Einstein search. And what that means is it's a component of Salesforce that learns your search patterns using what you've searched for historically. So if I'm an RC Care user, say I'm an event administrator, and the only thing that I ever search for, for the most part, is event numbers. I'm pulling up events, I'm working on events, and then I enter a number. The number that I enter, they're going to think that I'm looking most likely for an event, but maybe it's a case number. So as you go through and search for different things, the system will start to pick the records that you're most likely to click on and start to promote those things to the top. So, the example that I gave was events and case numbers, but it's the same with knowledge articles. If you've only really ever searched for cases, or you've only searched for client records and things like that, you haven't really used the knowledge articles, or you haven't really, maybe you've used them, but you haven't searched for them. What I would suggest, if you're having trouble finding articles or what you're looking for, is to, when you enter your search in the top global search bar, hit the search button. Don't just choose from the results that pop up on the screen. Hit the actual search button. It's going to bring you to the search results page. And then from there, you'll see on the left-hand side, there's a way you can select basically filter down the results, what you're trying to find. So on the left-hand side, you'll see you can filter by topic, or you could filter by knowledge. So you can actually just display, every single knowledge record that matches what you had in your search. And when you search for something, it's not just searching the title, it's not just searching the article summary, it's actually searching the entire body of the article. So if you're looking for something, chances are there's multiple results that are going to be found, and you may be missing things that you're looking for if you don't do that full search. If you don't hit the button, see the results that are displayed on the screen, understanding it could be a lot, right? And you can just filter down using those tabs on the left-hand side. I will also say that we're working on building out, in a true meta form, we're working on building out knowledge articles on using knowledge articles. So this is a work in progress. It's an evolution from where we started with launch, but we're doing this based in large on the feedback that we've received from the field. We're making sure that we have things, system enhancements like synonyms and, the action item articles, things that will help folks find the things that they're looking for. So we've heard you, and we're working on it. So hopefully that helps. Right, let me see here. Check Menti again. Not seeing any new ones in Menti. All right, I got a question for referrals. Regarding referrals, are we able to text referrals to clients and add the hyperlinks to them? Angie or JJ, do you know, or Jamie?
Dan, I'm gonna jump in on this one. It's not as simple as copy and pasting them. But I do believe that Flo made a knowledge article on how to do this. If not, it should be coming. There is a way. So there is a way to be able to text the referrals to the clients. And Flo is our referral magician, and she had the instructions, and I do believe it's a knowledge article. If not, we'll make it one real soon.
Thanks, Jamie. Yeah, that sounds right. So if you go into, we were just talking about searching for topics, right? So if you search for referrals, I believe the actual name of the topic is providing referrals. If you go in there, you can find that, pull it up. If it's not providing referrals, it's referrals. I apologize, I don't have the list right in front of me. But let us know if you have trouble finding that article, or if it doesn't exist yet. Like Jamie said, we're working on a lot of these, and we've got even some of the referrals ones that we just published. We had some changes in the system to enhance the display of the articles, so we're working on republishing some recently published stuff. Flo says it's peer referrals. Okay. All right, let's see here. I think we've gotten through the appropriate ones. Well, there's one I'm having trouble understanding. This is a question from Lauren. Lauren asked a question around the supplemental assistance and the different tiers. There's, I'm assuming what this says, I apologize, there's some typos in here, Lauren, the way it came across, but I think what I'm getting from this is they're having to do an RDO exception, or they're having to engage their RDO to do something for a 63-year-old person that should be eligible for Tier C supplemental. I don't know if, are we able to just talk about the different, well, actually, no, I take that back. We've got our next session is specifically focused on supplemental and RDO exceptions. So I apologize, I forgot about that for a moment, but I think we'll have more information to share there. I know we didn't want to talk about supplemental on this one because we've got that one coming up next. So Lauren, hopefully you can join us in 2 weeks for the next session. I don't want to steal anybody's thunder if they're going to announce the next date or anything, so I'll leave it at that. But if you're not able to join that next session, you still have the question, feel free to reach out to us at RC Care Rollout. I'm not seeing anything else in Q&A that's related to this topic. So I guess, Allison, I'll turn it back to you if you want to close this out.
Thanks, Dan. Yeah, I'll go ahead and we are at the bottom of the 4 o'clock hour here on the East Coast. So we have reached our time. I appreciate everyone spending their afternoon with us talking about casework and recovery planning, follow-up. Again, this session will be recorded, is recorded, and the slide deck will be posted to our RC Care office hours exchange page in the coming days. Our next session is coming up. That is September 8th, where we will be talking about supplemental assistance and RDO exceptions. Thanks again, everyone, for joining, and we will we'll let you go, and we'll see you in a few weeks. Enjoy your afternoon. Thank you.